The rope that bit into her wrists until it found bone. The rope that held her arms stretched wide between those two trees while three men beat her until she could not scream anymore. She survived that night. The men who did it did not survive the week. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me start at the beginning. Let me tell you about a girl who believed she was invisible. Josie Swanson was 23 years old when this story begins. She worked as a maid in the biggest ranch house in Arizona Territory, scrubbing floors that gleamed so bright you could see your reflection in them. Her hands carried calluses that told stories she never spoke out loud. Her dark hair stayed pinned tight against her head, never loose, never decorative. Her dresses were plain cotton, mended carefully at the seams where fabric wore thin from years of use. She was not beautiful in the way men wrote songs about. Her face carried a sharpness that came from too many hungry seasons and too many sleepless nights spent worrying about tomorrow. But her eyes were steady, her spine stayed straight even when her body screamed to bend. And she believed, truly believed, that she did not matter. The Gentry estate stretched so far that writers said it took dawn to dusk just to check the southern fence line. Thousands of cattle grazed on grassland that rolled like ocean waves, all bearing the same brand, all owned by one man whose name traveled faster than any letter the post office delivered. J.C. Gentry, cattle baron, landowner, a man who did not raise his voice because he never needed to. He stood 6 feet tall, broad through the shoulders, with hands that looked like they belonged to someone who built things and broke things with equal skill. His face carried no softness, just angles and weathered skin from years under the frontier sun. When he spoke, people leaned in to hear him. When he stopped speaking, conversations ended. His ranch house rose 3 stories high, built from timber and stone, hauled in from places so far away that the cost alone made other ranchers shake their heads in disbelief. Inside those walls, Josie moved like a ghost. She had spent 3 years perfecting the art of invisibility. She knew which floorboards creaked and avoided them. She knew which doors squeaked and opened them slowly. She knew how to dust a room while important men talked business, never once catching their attention, never once being noticed. Invisibility felt safe. Invisibility meant survival. On the morning everything began to change, Josie knelt in the main hallway, scrubbing baseboards with a brush that had lost half its bristles. Her arms burned from the effort. Her knees ached against the hardwood floor. Sweat dampened the back of her dress, even though the morning air still carried a chill. She muttered under her breath, words so quiet they barely counted as sound. If hard work actually paid, I would own this ranch twice over and still have change left for a new dress. The front door opened. Heavy boots crossed the threshold. J.C. Gentry walked past without looking down, his stride long and purposeful. 2 ranch hands followed behind him, arguing about a broken fence post in the north pasture. Josie stayed completely still until they passed. Then she went back to scrubbing. Nobody noticed her. Nobody ever noticed her. That was exactly how she wanted it. In the kitchen, her younger sister Vader stirred a pot of stew that smelled like beef and onions and something that almost resembled hope. At 19, Vader still carried brightness that Josie had lost somewhere along the way. Her laughter came easily. Her smile appeared without effort. She hummed melodies their mother used to sing while she worked. You look like death walked past and forgot to take you along. Vader said this without turning around when Josie entered the kitchen. Josie set her bucket down with a thud. Death looked at my work schedule and decided I was too busy to bother with. Vader laughed, the sound warm and full. She turned and wiped her hands on her apron. You need to rest more. You work like the whole house will collapse if you stop moving for even 1 minute. The house will not collapse, but we might. Rest costs money we do not have. Vader's smile dimmed slightly. She ladled stew into a bowl and pushed it across the counter. Eat. You cannot work if you faint from hunger. Josie ate standing up, shoveling food into her mouth between thoughts about the upstairs windows that needed washing, and the pantry that needed reorganizing, and the library that needed dusting before sundown. The stew is good. Good enough to marry? Vader raised her eyebrows with that teasing look she always got when she wanted to lighten the mood. Josie almost smiled. Almost. If food could marry, I would have proposed to bread years ago. At least bread never disappoints. Vader giggled. You are too serious, sister. If romance ever finds you, I think you might faint from the shock of it. Josie set the empty bowl down. Romance will have to arrive with money first. Heartbreak comes free, but it always collects interest later. If hard work were a husband, Vader said with a grin spreading across her face, you would have been married 3 years ago. Josie picked up her bucket and headed back to the hallway. She had work to do. She always had work to do. And she never once imagined that work would lead her somewhere she never expected to go. She never imagined that the man who walked past her without looking would one day look at her like she was the only person in the room. She never imagined that invisibility would not protect her from the violence that was coming. And she certainly never imagined that survival would teach her the most important lesson of her life. Some women cannot be broken. They can only be transformed. The afternoon sun beat down on the Gentry estate without mercy. Heat shimmered off the ground in waves that made the distant fence posts look like they were dancing. Ranch hands moved slowly through their work, conserving energy the way frontier people learned to do when summer arrived early and stayed late. Josie swept the front porch, her broom moving in steady strokes that had become automatic after years of practice. Her mind wandered to the list of tasks still waiting. The windows in the east wing needed washing. The silver needed polishing. The guest rooms needed fresh linens, even though no guests were expected. Work never ended on a ranch this size. A commotion near the stables caught her attention. One of the horses had gotten loose somehow. A massive animal, easily 16 hands high, with a coat the color of polished mahogany. It stood in the middle of the yard, refusing to move, while a young ranch hand tugged uselessly at its reins. The horse planted its hooves like it had grown roots right there in the dirt. Josie watched for a moment, then set her broom aside and walked toward the situation. She did not know why she did it. She had no experience with horses beyond avoiding getting stepped on by them. But something about the standoff bothered her. The ranch hand looked up when she approached. His face was red from effort and frustration. This fool animal will not budge. Josie reached for the reins without thinking. The horse turned its enormous head and looked at her. She looked back. Neither of them moved. We can do this the easy way, Josie said quietly, or we can both stand here until winter comes and freezes us where we stand. The horse snorted. She tried pulling the reins gently. Nothing happened. The animal did not move a single inch. She tried coaxing with gentle words. Still nothing. She tried offering a carrot she had stolen from the kitchen earlier that morning. The horse ate the carrot with obvious pleasure and then continued refusing to move. Josie sighed. I understand completely. Some days, even breathing feels like too much effort. I cannot blame you for refusing to cooperate. She turned to fetch one of the senior ranch hands, a man named Clark Todd who had worked the Gentry estate for 6 years. He took the reins from her with a nod and led the horse away without any difficulty at all, making the whole thing look absurdly simple. Josie stood there feeling foolish. That was when she realized J.C. Gentry had been watching from the porch. He stood with his arms crossed over his chest, his face completely unreadable. She had no idea how long he had been there or how much he had seen. The weight of his gaze made her skin warm in a way that had nothing to do with the afternoon sun. She walked past him, heading back to her abandoned broom, keeping her eyes fixed straight ahead. He spoke just as she passed. If you break yourself trying to do everything, I will have to find a replacement, and I dislike needless trouble. Josie stopped. Heat rushed to her face. Part embarrassment at being caught in a foolish situation, part irritation at being addressed like she was a piece of equipment that might malfunction. She turned slightly to face him. I am fine, sir. You are stubborn. That is not the same as being fine. Her spine straightened despite the way her muscles ached from a full day of work. I meant no trouble. His eyes held hers for 3 seconds longer than necessary. Something in his expression shifted, though she could not name what had changed. Trouble already knows your name, Miss Swanson. He walked away before she could respond. Josie stood frozen on the porch, her heart beating faster than it should have been, her thoughts spinning in directions she did not want them to go. He knew her name. In 3 years of working in his house, she had never heard him say her name out loud. She had assumed he did not know it. She had assumed she was just another worker, interchangeable with any other woman who could scrub floors and dust shelves. But he knew her name. That evening, Vader cornered her in the kitchen with sparkling eyes and barely contained excitement. He watched you for 10 whole minutes today. Josie shook her head, focusing on washing dishes to avoid her sister's knowing gaze. He watches everyone. That is part of his job as the man in charge. Not like that. Vader moved closer, lowering her voice even though no one else was around to hear. He watches you like he is trying to figure something out. Like you are a puzzle he cannot solve. You see romance in everything. Next, you will tell me the chickens in the yard are falling in love. Do not let a tall man end your life through eye contact alone. Vader was grinning now. Drink water. Keep your head clear. Face your work. Josie did exactly that. She finished the dishes. She hung her apron on its hook. She prepared to walk home through the gathering darkness. But something had shifted. She could feel it in the air around her, the way you can feel a storm coming before the first clouds appear on the horizon. J.C. Gentry had noticed her. After 3 years of careful invisibility, she had been seen. And she had no idea whether that was a good thing or the beginning of something terrible. The path home took her through the timber that separated the ranch house from the small cluster of homes where the workers lived. 15 minutes on a good day, 20 if the mud was bad. Tonight the sky was clear. Stars appeared one by one as the last light faded from the west. Crickets sang in the grass. An owl called out from somewhere in the trees. Josie walked quickly, her shawl pulled tight around her shoulders against the evening chill. She thought about J.C. Gentry standing on that porch. She thought about the way he had said her name. She thought about how foolish she was being, letting herself think about a man so far above her station that he might as well have lived on a different continent. Men like J.C. Gentry did not end up with women like Josie Swanson. That was simply not how the world worked. She reached home safely that night. She ate supper with Vader. She went to bed and fell asleep within minutes, exhausted from another long day. She had no way of knowing that 1 week later, she would be dragged off that same path by 3 strangers. She had no way of knowing that the timber she walked through every day would become the place where she almost died. And she certainly had no way of knowing that J.C. Gentry would ride out at midnight with 6 armed men to answer that violence with violence of his own. Some stories begin with love at first sight. This one began with blood and rope and rain, and it would end somewhere neither of them expected. 1 week later, the rain came. It started in the late afternoon, gentle at first, just a soft pattering against the windows of the ranch house. By evening, it had turned into something else entirely. Water hammered down from a sky so dark it looked like someone had pulled a curtain across the sun. Wind tore through the pine trees surrounding the estate with a sound that made Josie think of fabric ripping over and over again. She worked late that day. The library needed extra attention because JC was expecting visitors the following morning. Important men from the territorial government who wanted to discuss land rights and cattle routes and all the other complicated matters that kept wealthy people wealthy. By the time she finished, night had fallen completely. Vader found her near the back door, worry clear in her expression. "You cannot walk home in this storm. I have walked through worse. You have not. This is different. Stay here tonight, sleep in the kitchen. I will make you a pallet on the floor." Josie shook her head. She had her reasons for wanting to go home. Reasons she did not want to explain to her sister. The small house she rented might leak in heavy rain, and she needed to check the bucket she kept under the worst spot in the ceiling. "I will be fine. It is only 15 minutes. Vader grabbed her arm. "Please, something feels wrong tonight. I cannot explain it, but my stomach has been turning all day." Josie pulled free gently. "Your stomach turns when you eat too much bread. Stop worrying." She took the wool coat Vader offered anyway, a small concession to make her sister feel better. Then she stepped out into the rain and started walking. 2 steps from the door, the water was already soaking through her clothes. She pulled the coat tighter and moved quickly along the familiar path. The timber rose up around her, dark shapes against a darker sky. Rain fell so heavily she could barely see 10 feet ahead. Her shoes squished in mud that tried to pull them off with every step. Halfway through the timber, she heard something. Not the rain, not the wind, not the normal sounds of animals moving through the night. Footsteps. She stopped walking. Her heart kicked hard against her ribs. She turned slowly, peering into the darkness behind her. Nothing, just rain and wind and the shadows of trees. She started walking again, faster now. Her breath came quick and shallow. The coat felt too heavy. Her shoes slipped in the mud every other step. The footsteps matched her pace. She could hear them clearly now. More than one person. Coming closer. She spun around. Who was there? Three men stepped out from behind the trees. She did not recognize any of them. Their faces were rough and unshaven, marked by years of weather and violence that left permanent lines around their mouths and eyes. They wore hats pulled low and coats that had seen better decades. Their boots were caked in mud that suggested they had been waiting here for some time. The one in front was tall and wide through the shoulders. A scar ran from his left eyebrow to his cheekbone. He smiled when he saw her face. It was not a kind smile. It was the smile of someone who enjoyed having power over others. Evening, Miss Swanson. Her mouth went dry. Fear shot through her body, cold and sharp as winter ice. She took a step backward, her heel caught on a root. I want no trouble, neither do we. He stepped forward, closing the distance she had tried to create. We just have a message to deliver. I do not want your message. You do not get a choice. She ran, not toward home. That path was blocked. Into the trees instead, off the trail, into darkness that swallowed everything. Stupid, desperate, the only option her body could think of. They caught her within 10 steps. Hands grabbed her arms from behind, yanking her backward so hard her shoulder popped. She screamed, and someone hit her across the face hard enough to blur her vision. Stars exploded behind her eyes. She tasted blood, copper and salt mixed with rainwater. Her knees buckled, but they did not let her fall. Shut up. One of them said it with a voice flat and emotionless, like he was giving instructions on how to saddle a horse. They dragged her deeper into the timber, away from the path, away from anything resembling help or witnesses. Rain hammered down harder. Thunder rolled across the sky. Her feet scraped against roots and rocks. She tried to pull free, tried to twist away, but their grip was iron. They stopped between two trees that grew close together. Ancient things with thick trunks and bark scarred from decades of weather. One of them threw a rope over a low branch. The rope was thick and rough, the kind used for tying down cargo or securing livestock. Another grabbed her wrists, wrenching them behind her back with enough force that something in her shoulder popped again. Pain shot up her arms, bright and immediate. She kicked backward, connected with someone's shin. He grunted and punched her in the stomach. Air left her lungs in a rush. She doubled over, gasping, unable to draw breath. Panic flooded her body. They tied her wrists together, tight enough that the rope bit into skin, tight enough to cut off circulation. Then they pulled the rope up. Her arms went over her head. Her body lifted until her toes barely touched the mud below. She hung between the two trees, suspended, her weight pulling on her shoulders until they felt ready to rip from their sockets. The man with the scar stepped close. His face came inches from hers. His breath smelled like whiskey and tobacco and something rotten underneath. This is a message. His voice was calm, almost friendly. You work for the wrong man. You tell him that the land does not belong to him just because he says it does. Josie gasped for air. Her voice came out as barely a whisper. I do not speak for him. I am just a maid. I scrub his floors. I do not know anything about land or business or any of that. You will speak for him now. They hit her. Fists connected with her ribs. 1, 2, 3. She lost count after 4. Pain became a single overwhelming thing, impossible to separate into individual sources. Her ribs felt like they were cracking. Her face swelled where knuckles landed. Blood ran down her chin and dripped onto her chest. She stopped screaming. She stopped fighting. Her body went limp, hanging from the rope like meat in a smokehouse. When they finally finished, they stepped back, breathing hard from the effort of beating someone who could not fight back. The leader leaned close one more time. Remember this night, and make sure he remembers it too. They walked away. Their footsteps faded into the sound of rain and wind, and Josie hung there alone. Time stopped meaning anything. Minutes felt like hours. Hours might have been minutes. Her shoulders screamed with every small movement. Her wrists burned where the rope had cut through skin. Her ribs throbbed with every shallow breath she managed to draw. She thought about her sister waiting at home, wondering why she had not arrived. She thought about the stew they had shared that morning and how she had not told Vader it was delicious. She thought about how stupid she had been to refuse staying in the kitchen. She thought about darkness and how it was always free, which explained why poor people spent so much time familiar with it. She thought about dying here between these trees. Her body found days later by someone who would shake their head and say what a shame and then forget her name by evening. She thought about how unfair it was to survive 23 years of poverty and hard work, only to end like this. A message for a man she barely knew. Eventually the rope loosened, not much, just enough that her body weight pulled it through whatever knot they had tied. She dropped, collapsed face first into the mud. Her arms were still bound behind her back. She could not catch herself. Her face hit the ground hard enough to make her see stars again. She lay there for a long time, face down, breathing into the earth, tasting dirt and rain and her own blood. Then she started crawling. Pride went first. It left without ceremony, abandoned somewhere in the mud behind her. Then dignity. Then any sense of who she had been before tonight. What remained was pure stubborn will, the kind that does not think or plan, the kind that just moves forward because stopping means dying. She crawled through mud and rain, dragging herself inch by inch, her dress caught on roots, her knees scraped against rocks hidden in the darkness. The rope around her wrists finally gave way when she scraped it against a sharp stone. Back and forth until the fibers frayed and snapped. Her hands came free, numb and useless, the fingers refusing to bend. She kept crawling. The timber ended eventually. Her small house appeared ahead, a dark shape against a darker sky, lamplight glowing faint in one window where Vader had stayed up waiting. She reached the door, pushed it open with her shoulder, collapsed inside onto the wooden floor. Vader screamed. The sound came from far away, muffled by the ringing in Josie's ears. Footsteps rushed toward her. Hands touched her face, her shoulders, checking for damage. What happened? Who did this? Josie, talk to me, please. Please say something. Josie lay on the floor, soaked and shaking and broken in ways she could not yet understand. She managed to speak through split lips that barely moved. Next time, I will definitely marry a man who owns a roof over his head. Then darkness took her, and for a long time she knew nothing at all. Josie woke to pain. It lived in every part of her body, a constant presence that made even breathing feel like work. Her ribs screamed with each inhale. Her face throbbed where fists had landed. Her wrists burned where rope had cut through skin all the way to the bone beneath. Sunlight came through the window, bright and intrusive, making her squint against the assault. Vader sat beside the bed. Her face was pale and drawn. Dark circles under her eyes suggested she had not slept at all. When she saw Josie's eyes open, relief flooded her expression so strongly that tears started falling down her cheeks. You are awake, thank God. Thank God you are awake. Josie tried to speak. Her throat was raw and dry. She coughed, winced at the pain in her ribs, and tried again. How long have I been sleeping? Since midnight. It is almost 8 in the morning now. 8 hours. Josie tried to sit up. Her body refused to cooperate. Everything hurt too much to coordinate any kind of movement. Vader stood quickly and pressed gentle hands against her shoulders. Do not move. You need to rest. You need to heal. I need to work. No, we need the money, Vader. I do not care about money right now. Vader's voice shook with emotion she was trying very hard to control. You almost died last night. Do you understand that? You crawled home through the mud with your hands tied behind your back. You were beaten so badly I could barely recognize your face. Money does not matter compared to that. Josie closed her eyes for a moment. Then she opened them again. Help me sit up. Vader stared at her, frustration and fear warring in her expression. Finally, she sighed and helped Josie push herself upright. The movement sent fresh waves of pain through her ribs. Josie gasped and gripped the edge of the bed until her knuckles went white. This is foolish, I know. You can barely move. I can move well enough. Vader's jaw tightened. Her eyes shone with tears she refused to let fall. If you die because you are too stubborn to rest, I will march into the next world myself and shake some sense back into you. Josie managed a weak smile. I will look forward to that conversation. She washed in cold water that stung every cut and bruise on her body. The mirror showed her face swollen on one side, a bruise spreading from her cheekbone to her jaw in shades of purple and sickly yellow. Her lip was split. Her left eye had nearly swollen shut. She looked like she had been asked to fight, which was accurate, except she had not fought. She had hung there and taken it because there was nothing else she could do. The thought made her stomach turn. She changed into a clean dress, moving slowly. Every motion required conscious thought and effort. The dress buttoned up the front. Her fingers fumbled with the buttons, stiff and clumsy from the rope burns on her wrists. It took 5 minutes to complete a task that normally took 30 seconds. She pinned her hair up carefully, working around the swelling on the side of her face. Her hands shook the entire time. When she finished, she looked at her reflection again. The woman staring back looked like she had survived something terrible. And she had. Vader appeared in the doorway, arms crossed, face set in stubborn lines. You are not going back there. I have to. You can barely stand upright. I can stand well enough. Why? Why do this to yourself? Josie turned to face her sister. Because if I do not go back today, I will never go back. And then they win. And I cannot let them win. Vader's expression softened. She crossed the room and pulled Josie into a careful hug, mindful of all the injuries. You are the bravest and most stubborn person I have ever known. Bravery and stupidity look exactly the same when you watch them from a distance. You are not stupid. I am walking back to work for the man whose name those men used right before they started beating me. That feels fairly stupid to me. Vader pulled back and gripped Josie's shoulders. Do you want me to come with you? No, stay here. I will be fine. You are not fine. I will be fine eventually. That is close enough. The walk to the Gentry estate took twice as long as usual. Josie moved carefully. Each step a negotiation between will and body. The morning sun felt too bright. The air felt too heavy. Everything hurt in ways that made her wonder if something inside had broken that she could not see. Ranch hands saw her coming and quickly looked away, their faces carefully neutral. Word had spread then. Of course it had. Gossip traveled faster than horses on the frontier. She entered through the back door, the one that led directly to the kitchen. The room was empty, breakfast already served and cleaned up. She hung her shawl on its hook and went to find work. The main hallway needed sweeping. She fetched a broom and started working, moving slowly, keeping her motion small and controlled. At 10 in the morning, footsteps approached from behind. She knew who it was before he spoke. Something about the measured pace, the weight of each step, the way the air in the room seemed to change when he entered. Stop! J.C. Gentry's voice came from directly behind her, quiet and controlled. Josie froze, her hands gripping the broom handle, her breath caught halfway to her lungs. Turn around! She lowered the broom slowly and turned to face him. J.C. stood 3 feet away. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes moved across her face, noting every mark she had tried to hide. The swelling, the bruise, the split lip. His gaze dropped to her wrists. The rope burns showed red and raw against her skin, angry lines that circled completely around. The silence stretched long enough that Josie wanted to fill it with words, explanations, anything to break the weight of his stare. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. His hands, which had been loose at his sides, curled slowly into fists. What happened? His voice was carefully level, too level, like he was working very hard to keep something dangerous under control. I fell. His eyes narrowed. Try again. I am clumsy. I tripped in the dark and fell down. Stop lying to me. Heat rushed to her face. Part shame, part anger she did not know she had permission to feel. Her spine straightened despite the pain it caused. It is none of your concern, Mr. Gentry. He stepped closer. Not threatening. Focused. His presence filled the space between them until the air felt thin and hard to breathe. Answer the question, Miss Swanson. Her heart hammered against her bruised ribs. She wanted to look away. She could not. His gaze held hers with an intensity that made her skin warm and her thoughts scatter. His voice dropped lower, quieter. carrying an intensity that felt almost intimate. Who did this to you? The words landed between them, soft and sharp at the same time. Not a demand, a promise wrapped in a question. The way he said it, the focus in his eyes, the careful control in his voice. It all felt like something more than concern for an employee. She tried to hold the lie, tried to keep the truth locked behind her teeth, where it could not cause more damage. His gaze never wavered. Men, she whispered finally, in the timber, last night. 3 of them. How many? 3. Did you know them? No, I had never seen any of them before. What did they say? She hesitated. Fear clawed at her throat. Not fear for herself, fear for what might come next, fear for what his response might cost. They said I work for the wrong man. They said the land does not belong to you just because you say it does. They told me to give you a message. JC's expression did not change. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. His hands, already fisted, tightened further until his knuckles went white. Where? Between 2 trees, close together, off the main path through the timber. He nodded once, a sharp downward jerk of his chin. Then he turned and walked toward the door. Wait! Josie said it before she could stop herself. He stopped but did not turn around. Please do not make this worse. Now he turned, and for the first time since she had known him, something like emotion crossed his face. Not anger exactly, something colder, something that made her stomach drop. It is already worse. His voice was quiet. You just did not know it yet. He left, and Josie stood alone in the hallway, surrounded by silence and the sudden certainty that something had shifted. She felt it in her chest, a tightness that had nothing to do with her injuries. J.C. Gentry was not going to let this go, and whatever came next would change everything. Around midnight, horses returned to the Gentry estate. Josie had not gone home. Vader had refused to let her walk through the timber alone, and Josie had refused to ask anyone for an escort. So she stayed in the kitchen, sitting near the window, watching darkness settle over the land. She heard the hoof beats first, then voices, low and serious. She moved to the front of the house, arriving at the door just as JC entered. He stopped just inside the threshold. His coat was damp from night air. His expression was unreadable. Blood spotted his right sleeve. Not much. Just enough to notice. Josie's breath caught. Are you hurt? No, your sleeve has blood on it. Not my blood. Bun. The simple statement carried weight she did not want to examine too closely. It is done. He said it the way someone might say the sun rose this morning. A simple fact. What is done? They will not touch you again. They will not touch anyone again. Are they? She stopped. Unsure if she wanted the answer. Do not ask questions you do not want answered. Josie swallowed hard. I never wanted this. I know. He stepped closer. In the dim lamplight, she saw something in his face she had never seen before. Not rage, not coldness. Something almost like pain. You did not deserve what they did to you. No one does. I am just a maid. I scrubbed floors. I was not worth all this trouble. You are not just anything. He moved closer still, near enough that she could smell leather and horse and something metallic she did not want to name. You work under my roof. You live on my land. That makes you my responsibility. That means something. She did not know how to respond. Words felt inadequate, too small for whatever this moment was. He studied her face, his gaze moving across the bruises, the swelling, the rope burns on her wrists. Something in his expression hardened. This should not have happened. It did happen. It will not happen again. The certainty in his voice made her chest tighten. He said it like a fact, like gravity, like something unchangeable. He turned to leave, then paused with his hand on the doorframe. Rest tomorrow. You are not working. I need to work. That is not a request. He left before she could argue. His footsteps faded into the night. Josie stood alone in the entrance, her heart beating too fast, her thoughts spinning in directions she could not control. Vader appeared from the kitchen. You heard everything? Yes. What are you going to do? I do not know. He cares about you. He cares about his property. I work here. That makes me his responsibility. Keep telling yourself that. Vader smiled softly, but we both know this is more than that. Josie did not argue. She was too tired to argue, too confused, too afraid of what arguing might reveal. She went home that night with Vader walking beside her, both of them carrying lanterns against the darkness. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her body aching, her mind racing. Somewhere out there, 3 men were dead. She did not know the details, did not want to know, but she felt the weight of it, the knowledge that men had died because they hurt her. She should feel guilty. She should feel horrified. Instead, she felt something else entirely, safe. For the first time in years, she felt safe, and that feeling terrified her more than any beating ever could. The next morning, news traveled faster than sunrise. By dawn, everyone in town had heard what happened. Everyone understood the message. 3 men were missing. Nobody found bodies. Nobody found evidence. But everyone knew. J.C. Gentry had drawn a line, and anyone who crossed it would not get a second warning. Josie learned about it from Vader, who heard it from Clark Todd, who heard it from another ranch hand who had ridden into town at dawn. They are saying J.C. did it himself. Of course they are. They are right. They are afraid. Good. Maybe fear will keep others from doing the same thing. 2 weeks later, Josie learned the real truth. She overheard it by accident. She was standing in the hallway outside J.C.'s study, where he spoke with Clark Todd and 2 other senior ranch hands. The door was not quite closed. Voices carried. "The Patterson outfit is making moves," Clark's voice was serious. "They are buying up smaller ranches, pushing into grazing land that borders ours to the west. Let them." JC sounded calm, unconcerned. "There is enough land for everyone. They do not see it that way. They see you as the obstacle. Big operation, good reputation, friends in the territorial government. They cannot expand while you control the routes to market. So they decided to test my response by sending men after one of my workers." Josie's breath caught. Her hand pressed against the wall to steady herself. "According to what we learned in town, Patterson wanted to see how you would react to a personal insult." Another voice added, "He figured attacking someone close to the house would show if you were getting soft. If you could be pushed." Did I seem soft? No, sir. Good. Make sure Patterson understands. If he wants land, he can buy it honestly at fair prices. If he wants war, I will give him more war than he can handle. Josie stepped away from the door quietly. Her mind was racing. She had been a test, a target chosen not randomly but deliberately, chosen to gauge JC's response, to probe for weakness. Men had died because of a cattle baron's strategy. She felt sick. That evening, JC found her in the library. She was dusting shelves with shaking hands. He took one look at her face and knew. "You heard. Yes, I was going to tell you." "When?" "After more people died." He closed the door behind him, ensuring privacy. "I wanted to wait until you were healed. I am healed enough to know I was bait." Her voice rose despite her effort to control it. "I was beaten and hung from a tree because some cattle baron wanted to test your response. Not because I did anything wrong. Not because I mattered as a person. Because hurting me was convenient. You matter now. Because you say so. Because you killed 3 men and suddenly I am valuable. You were always valuable." They made the mistake of not knowing it. "Stop." She set down her dusting cloth, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "Stop acting like this is simple. Stop acting like violence solves everything. 3 men are dead. More will come. Patterson will not stop just because you made an example. Let him try. And when he does, when he sends more men, when he targets Vader instead of me, when he burns the houses where workers live to make his point, what happens then?" JC's jaw tightened. "I will handle it. You cannot handle everything. You are not you are just a man with more land and more guns than your neighbors. I am a man who protects what belongs to him. I do not belong to you." The words landed hard between them, sharp and final. His expression shifted. Something wounded flickered in his eyes before he controlled it. "I know, do you? Because you act like I am your property, like your protection comes with ownership attached. I act like I care about what happens to you. If that offends you, then I apologize. But I will not apologize for keeping you safe. Safe? She laughed, a bitter sound without any humor in it. I was beaten because of you, because I worked for you, because Patterson wanted to test you. How is any of that safe? He stepped closer. His voice dropped to something almost gentle. You were beaten because Patterson's a coward who preys on vulnerable people. That is his sin, not mine. I did not ask for this fight, but I will finish it. More blood will not fix this. Maybe not, but it will make sure Patterson thinks twice before targeting anyone under my protection ever again. And when you are gone, when you die or move on or lose everything, what happens to the people you protect then? I am not going anywhere. Everyone goes somewhere eventually. Death does not care about cattle empires. He reached out. His hand cupped her face gently. His thumb brushed across her cheekbone where the last of the bruising still showed faintly yellow. I will make sure you are safe long after I am gone. She pulled away from his touch, her heart racing, her emotions too tangled to sort. Stop making promises you cannot keep. I have never broken a promise in my life. There is always a first time. She left the library, left him standing alone, surrounded by books and silence, and went to find her sister. 3 months passed, the bruises faded, the rope burns healed into thin white scars that circled her wrists like bracelets she could never remove. Her ribs stopped aching when she breathed. Patterson sent representatives to the ranch. 2 men dressed formally, riding horses that cost more than Josie earned in 5 years. They met with JC in his study, offered apologies, proposed boundary agreements, promised compensation. Patterson was backing down, not because he had changed his mind about expansion, because he understood the cost of pushing further. JC Gentry had made that cost very clear. Life settled into something almost normal. Josie worked, Vader cooked. The ranch operated like a small kingdom, and everything continued the way it always had, except nothing was actually the same. JC watched her now. Not obviously, not in ways that made her uncomfortable, but she could feel his attention following her through rooms, checking without being obvious about it. She caught him watching during lunch one afternoon. He did not look away, neither did she. Something unspoken passed between them. An acknowledgement of connection that neither was ready to name out loud. That evening he found her on the porch. She had gone outside to escape the heat of the kitchen. She sat on the steps watching the sun paint the horizon in shades of orange and red and deep purple. He sat down beside her without asking permission. The wooden step creaked under his weight. They sat in silence for a long moment, watching the light fade together. How are you healing? He asked finally. Better every day. Good. More silence stretched between them. She decided to break it. I have been thinking. About what? About what those men said. About the land. About why they targeted me specifically. JC's posture stiffened slightly. Anne, they were not wrong about one thing. Your control is built on fear. Fear keeps people in line. Fear makes them follow rules. Fear works. But fear also breeds resentment. And eventually resentment breeds violence. Someone will always want to test the man in charge. What would you have me do differently? I do not know. I am just a maid. I clean your house. I have no answers for how cattle barons should run their empires. You are not just a maid. His voice carried an edge. Stop saying that. She turned to look at him. Then what am I? He met her gaze, his expression serious. You are someone who matters. To who exactly? The answer should have been simple. Instead, he hesitated. And in that hesitation, she saw the truth he was not yet ready to speak. To this ranch, to your sister, to the people who depend on you. She waited. And to you? She had to ask. Had to know, yes. He held her gaze. To me, the admission hung in the evening air. Fragile and dangerous. Why, I do not know. But I am done pretending otherwise. Josie's breath caught. She had suspected. She had wondered. But hearing him say it out loud made everything real in ways that terrified her. I am nobody, she said quietly. I have nothing. I am exactly what I told you. Just a maid who scrubs your floors and washes your windows. You are stubborn and intelligent and stronger than you understand. He shifted slightly closer. You survived something that would have broken most people. You crawled home through pain and rain and mud. You came back to work 3 days later. That is not nothing. That is not just a maid. That is someone worth knowing. You do not actually only know Nick. Then let me. The offer sat between them. An invitation she did not know how to accept. I should go inside. She stood slowly. He caught her hand. Gently, his grip warm and careful. Josie. She froze at the sound of her name. He never used it. Always Miss Swanson, always formal. Hearing her name and his voice felt intimate in ways she was not prepared for. I know you are afraid, he said quietly. I know this is complicated. I know we come from different worlds and different lives, and nothing about this makes sense, he paused. But I will not apologize for caring about what happens to you. She pulled her hand free, gently. I am not asking you to apologize. I am asking you to understand that I cannot be what you want me to be. What do you think I want you to be? I do not know, but whatever it is, I am not it. She went inside before he could respond, her heart hammering, her thoughts spinning. Vader found her in the kitchen 10 minutes later, sitting at the small table, staring at nothing. What happened? He said I mattered to him. Vader pulled out a chair and sat down across from her. And what did you say? That I am nobody. Josie. Vader's voice was gentle but firm. Look at us. Look at this house. Look at our lives. We are servants, workers, replaceable. Not to him, especially to him. He can hire anyone. Hundreds of women could scrub his floors, but there is only one you. Josie shook her head. I do not want this. I do not want to care about someone who lives in a different world, someone I could never actually fit into. Too late. You already care about him. The truth of it settled in Josie's chest, heavy and undeniable. She did care, had cared for longer than she wanted to admit. Somewhere between his quiet observations and his controlled fury on her behalf, she had started to see him as something other than her employer, and the realization terrified her, because people like her did not end up with people like him. Not in real life, not on the frontier where class lines were drawn in land ownership and bank accounts. She had survived violence. She would survive this too, even if it hurt worse than any rope burn ever could. 1 month later, JC asked her to marry him. Not with flowers, not with poetry, with plain words delivered in the library where he kept his ledgers, and she had spent countless hours dusting shelves. I want you to marry me. Josie looked up from the book she was organizing, her hands stilled mid-motion. Why would I? Because you belong here. Because I want you to stay. Because I can protect you better as my wife than as my worker. She set the book down carefully, buying time to gather her scattered thoughts. That is not very romantic. I am not offering romance. I am offering partnership. Most men offer both. I am not most men. And you are not most women. He had a point there. She crossed her arms and studied his face, looking for signs of uncertainty. She found none. What if I say no? Then you say no. I will not force you into anything, he paused. But things will change regardless. How? Because I have already changed. Because you have already changed me. Refusing to marry me does not undo that. She walked to the window, looking out at the land that stretched endlessly in all directions. Cattle grazed, ranch hands worked. Life continued the way it always did, indifferent to human decisions. I do not love you. She said it carefully, testing the words. I know. I might never love you. That is your choice to make. Then why propose at all? He moved to stand beside her at the window, his reflection visible in the glass. Because when I saw what they did to you, I wanted to burn the whole world down. And I realized I had no right to feel that way unless you were mine. He turned to face her. Not mine like property, mine like a vow, mine like a bone we choose with open eyes and keep with our whole lives. The honesty of it stole her breath. She had expected pretty words or strategic reasoning. Instead, he gave her raw truth. I need time to think. Take all the time you need. He left the room, giving her silence enough to breathe, and time enough to make up her mind. Josie thought about his proposal for 3 full days. She turned it over in her mind until her thoughts grew tired. She weighed what marriage would bring: Safety, security, a respected place in the world. Protection not just for herself, but for Vader too. And she weighed what it might cost. Pride, independence, the kind of heartbreak that ruins a person quietly from the inside. She knew people would stare. She knew enemies would take note. She feared losing herself inside a life too big for someone with her name. But she also remembered how he looked at her, how he rode out at midnight with armed men to answer violence on her behalf, how he never once made her feel small or inadequate, how he pushed her to see herself as valuable when she had spent her whole life believing she was invisible. She thought about the girl who had hung between those two trees, certain she would die alone in the rain. And she thought about the woman she was becoming, someone who refused to let fear make all her decisions, someone who was learning that survival was not just about enduring pain. It was also about choosing joy when joy presented itself. On the fourth day, she found JC in the stable. He was brushing down his horse with careful strokes, focused on the task, not looking up when she entered. Yes, she said it simply. He stopped brushing, turned to face her, his expression carefully neutral. Yes, what? Yes, I will marry you. Something changed in his face. The controlled mask he always wore cracked just slightly. What made you decide? I thought about the girl I was before I met you, the one who believed she was invisible, the one who thought hard work was the only thing that mattered and love was something other people got to experience. She stepped closer. And I thought about who I want to become. Someone who takes chances. Someone who chooses living instead of just surviving. He closed the distance between them in 3 strides. His hands cupped her face, gentle despite their size. And he kissed her. Not soft, not tentative, with an intensity that made her knees weak and her heart race. When he pulled back, his forehead rested against hers. You will not regret this decision. I hope you are right. I am almost never wrong. Now you are just bragging. He smiled, a rare expression that made him look years younger. Maybe, but I am right about this, about us. They married 2 weeks later. The ceremony took place in the small church in town, simple and intimate, not many guests. Vader stood beside Josie, grinning so wide it looked like her face might split apart from happiness. Her eyes shone with tears she refused to let fall. Clark Todd stood with JC, looking proud and slightly uncomfortable in his formal clothes. A handful of ranch hands attended. Some townspeople came to see it with their own eyes. Not because they loved Josie, because news travels fast in small places, and then everyone wanted to witness the cattle baron marry his former maid. Josie wore a white dress Vader had sewn for her over countless late nights. Simple cotton with lace at the collar and cuffs. It was the finest thing she had ever worn. JC wore a dark suit, his hair combed back, his boots polished to a shine. When the preacher asked if she took JC as her husband, Josie said yes without hesitation, her voice clear and strong. When JC was asked the same question, he said yes. Like a vow, like a promise, like something eternal. They walked out of the church as husband and wife. The town watched with expressions ranging from approval to surprise to envy. The reception was simple but warm, food and drink spread across tables in the ranch house. Music from a fiddle player who usually worked the north pasture, dancing in the main hall where furniture had been pushed aside to make room. Josie danced with Vader first. The 2 sisters laughed and spun until they were dizzy and breathless. Then she danced with Clark, who turned out to be surprisingly skilled despite claiming otherwise. Then with several ranch hands who offered politely and stepped carefully, treating her with a new respect that felt strange and wonderful. Finally, JC took her hand. He held her close, one hand at her waist, the other clasping hers. They moved slowly together, not because the music was slow, because neither of them wanted the moment to end. How do you feel? Of me, of everything, of being married, of belonging to someone, of mattering. You always mattered, not like this. Before tonight, if I disappeared, the world would just keep turning. Now I am someone's wife. People know my name. I cannot be invisible anymore. Is that so terrible? She considered the question seriously. I do not know yet. Ask me again in a year. I will. I promise. When the reception ended and the guests departed, JC carried her over the threshold of his bedroom. Their bedroom now. She looked around the space with new eyes. The room was large, almost excessive. A bed big enough for 4 people. A wardrobe holding more clothes than she had ever owned. A window overlooking the entire eastern pasture. This is my room now. The words felt strange in her mouth. Our room. He set her down gently, his hands lingering at her waist. Our room. She repeated it, testing how it sounded. I have never done this either. She blinked in surprise. Never, never. I waited. For what? For you. The admission made her chest tight with emotion. She reached up and touched his face, feeling the rough stubble along his jaw. I'm afraid I will disappoint you. Impossible. You cannot know that. I know you, that is enough. He kissed her then, deep and slow. His hands traced the curve of her neck with careful attention that sent shivers across her skin. Every touch deliberate, every moment meant to show her she was valued. She had been afraid this part would feel like obligation. Instead, it felt like coming home. Afterward, they lay tangled together under soft sheets, her head on his chest, his arm around her waist, listening to each other breathe. Are you all right? Yes. She lifted her head to meet his eyes. Truly, it was better than I imagined. Good. I would hate to disappoint on our wedding night. She laughed softly. You did not disappoint. They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, 2 people who had chosen each other intentionally, despite every reason not to. Outside, the frontier stretched vast and dark and full of dangers. Inside, something new and fragile and precious began to grow. Time moved forward the way it always did on the frontier, measured in seasons and survival, measured in small victories, in quiet moments, in the gradual building of something lasting. A year after their wedding, Josie gave birth to a daughter. They named her Alina. The baby had JC's dark hair and Josie's sharp eyes. She cried loud and often, demanding attention with the confidence of someone who already knew she was deeply loved. Josie held her daughter and marveled at how strange it felt to create life after nearly losing her own. JC was a careful father, awkward at first, clearly terrified of doing something wrong, but determined. He learned to hold Alina without looking like he might drop her at any moment, learned to change her without fumbling, learned to rock her to sleep while humming something completely off-key. You are good at this, Josie said one night, watching him walk the floor with their daughter in his arms. I am completely terrified. You hide it well. She is so small. What if I break her? You will not break her. You did not break me. He looked at her over Alina's tiny head, his expression soft in the lamplight. You are much sturdier than she is. Give her time. She has your stubborn streak already, and your intelligence, I hope. Time will tell. 2 years later, a son arrived. They named him Emmett, after the man JC considered his closest friend on the ranch. Emmett was quiet where his sister was loud, thoughtful where she was impulsive, gentle where she was bold. Josie loved them both with a fierceness that surprised her. She had not known she could love this way, protective and consuming and absolute. The kind of love that made her understand exactly why JC had ridden out that night to answer violence with violence. Some things were worth fighting for. Some people were worth protecting at any cost. Vader married Clark Todd 3 years after Josie's wedding. JC built them a house nearby as a gift. Clark insisted on working to pay it back, refusing charity even from family. They had 2 children of their own, a son named Owen and a daughter named Malene. The children grew up together, cousins in spirit if not always in blood, running wild across the ranch, learning to ride horses and chase chickens and cause exactly the kind of chaos that made adults sigh and smile at the same time. Josie managed the household now with authority instead of servitude. She hired staff and paid them fairly, treated them with respect that created loyalty instead of fear. Workers who had once whispered about the cattle baron now spoke the gentry name with pride. She made sure Clark received opportunities to advance. Within 3 years, he managed his own section of the ranch, overseeing 50 head of cattle and a crew of 6 men. His wages tripled, his family prospered. You did not have to do any of this, Vader said one afternoon. They sat on the porch of Vader's house watching their children play together in the yard. Yes, I did. You saved my life more times than I can count. You believed in me when I could not believe in myself. This is the least I can do. I was just being your sister. Exactly. And now I am being yours. Josie also started teaching. Twice a week, she held lessons in the church for women who had never learned to read. She used books JC ordered from cities back east, primers and novels and anything she could find. Some women came to learn actual skills. Others came just to escape their homes for a few hours. Josie understood both motivations. She taught them to read and write and do basic arithmetic. She taught them that knowledge gave them power, that education could not be taken away once earned. Some of the women went on to teach their own children. Others used their new skills to find better work. A few simply enjoyed knowing things for their own sake. All of them were grateful. All of them remembered who had helped them. 3 more children arrived over the following years. Another daughter named Clara, a son named Luke, and finally a daughter they called Stephanie, born during a thunderstorm that shook the entire house. 5 children total. The house rang with noise and life and the organized chaos of a family that functioned through love and structure. JC built additions to accommodate their growing family. He hired tutors to educate the children properly. He set aside land for each child, ensuring they would have their own futures secured. Josie never forgot where she came from. She kept her old work dress folded in a trunk in the attic, the one she had been wearing the night she was attacked, blood-stained and torn and mended in places where the fabric had ripped. She looked at it once a year, a reminder of survival. JC found her standing in front of the open trunk one afternoon, the dress in her hands. "Why do you keep that?" "Because I need to remember." "Remember what?" "That I am stronger than I ever believed I could be. That I survived something terrible. That I crawled home through pain and rain and mud and chose to keep living." He stepped behind her, his arms wrapped around her waist, his chin rested on her shoulder. "You were always strong, you just did not have anyone to believe it alongside you." She set the dress back in the trunk and closed the lid. "I believe it now." By the time Elena turned 18, she was managing ranch operations alongside her father. Sharp intelligence and sharper wit. Everyone said she was exactly like her mother. Emmett became his father's shadow, learning cattle management and land stewardship with quiet diligence. Clara loved horses more than people and spent most of her time in the stables. Luke had a gift for numbers that made him valuable during sales and negotiations. Stephanie sang constantly, filling the house with melodies that made even difficult days feel lighter. And Josie watched them all grow, marveling at what she and JC had built together. Not just a ranch, a legacy, a family that would carry forward long after they were gone. She thought sometimes about the girl she had been, scrubbing floors and chasing chickens, believing she was invisible, believing she did not matter. That girl felt like a stranger now, someone from another lifetime entirely, and maybe she was. Maybe Josie had died that night in the timber, hanging between those 2 trees, waiting for rescue that never came. And maybe the woman who crawled home had been someone new, someone forged in pain and transformed by survival, someone who refused to let the worst thing that ever happened to her define the rest of her life. Some women cannot be broken. They can only be transformed. Josie had learned that lesson the hard way, and she had spent every day since proving it true. 23 years after the night everything changed, Josie walked alone into the timber. The path was familiar even after all this time. Same trees, same dirt, same dappled sunlight filtering through the canopy overhead. She was 46 years old now. Her hair carried streaks of gray she did not bother hiding. Lines had appeared around her eyes from years of smiling and squinting into the frontier sun. Her hands showed the marks of work and motherhood, but her spine was still straight, and her eyes were still steady. The 2 trees stood exactly where she remembered them, close together, branches twisted into a permanent embrace, bark scarred from decades of weather, and from rope. She could still see the grooves worn into the bark, faint after so many years, but there, evidence of the night she almost died. She stood between the trees for a long moment. Rain had fallen the night before. The air smelled clean, like growing things and possibility. Birds called from somewhere in the branches. Sunlight warmed her face. She felt no fear, no rage, just quiet acknowledgement. This was where she had almost ended. Instead, it became where she began. She touched the tree trunk, her fingers tracing the old rope marks worn smooth by time and weather. "Thank you," she whispered the words, not to the trees, to herself, to the woman who had survived. "Thank you for not giving up, for crawling home when staying still would have been easier, for going back to work when hiding would have been safer, for saying yes when fear wanted you to say no. Thank you for choosing to live." She stayed there for a while longer, breathing in the peaceful morning, letting old wounds finally finish healing. Then she turned and walked back toward home. JC was waiting on the porch when she returned. His hair had gone completely white now. His face carried deeper lines, but his presence was still solid and steady, the foundation their entire family was built on. "Where did you go?" "To remember." He studied her face for a moment, then nodded. He understood. After more than 2 decades of marriage, they communicated in glances and silences as much as words. "Are you all right? I am better than all right. I am grateful." "For what?" "For surviving. For you. For everything we built together." He pulled her close, his arms wrapped around her the way they had thousands of times before. Familiar and warm and safe. "I am grateful too." That evening their family gathered for dinner. The table stretched long to accommodate everyone. Elina and her husband, Emmett and his wife, Clara, still unmarried but content, Luke with his young son on his knee, Stephanie singing softly while she helped serve the food. Grandchildren ran underfoot, small, chaotic bundles of energy that turned every meal into an adventure. Vader sat across from Josie, older now but still bright, still warm, her face lined with laughter and love. Clark sat beside his wife, weathered but content, his hand reaching for hers under the table the way he had done for 20 years. "Remember when we thought we would die poor and alone?" Vader asked, smiling at her sister across the crowded table. "I remember. Look at us now." Josie looked around at the faces of everyone she loved, at the house that had once felt like a workplace and now felt like home, at the man beside her who had seen her at her worst and chosen her anyway. "We did well," she said quietly. "You did well," Vader corrected. "You survived, and you built something beautiful from that survival." After dinner, Josie and JC walked outside together. The land stretched endlessly under a sky full of stars, dark and vast and no longer frightening. "Do you have any regrets?" he asked. "A few." She paused. "None about you, even when you are difficult?" "Especially then. You keep me honest." She laughed softly. "I thought I would hate being married. I thought I would lose myself in your shadow." "And did you?" "No." She turned to face him. "I found myself instead, the person I was always meant to become. I just needed someone to believe I could get there." He pulled her close, the embrace of someone who had held her through childbirth and illness and fear and joy. "I always believed in you. From the very first day. You never said anything. I did not know how, and now? Now I have had 23 years of practice." They stood together in comfortable silence, the kind built over decades of shared life, of choosing each other over and over again. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. Cattle lowed softly from the pastures. The wind moved through the grass with a sound like whispered secrets. "I am glad I survived," she said finally. "So am I, more than you will ever know." They walked back toward the house hand in hand. Their steps matched after years of practice, their lives intertwined so completely that neither could remember where one ended and the other began. Inside, lamplight glowed warm through the windows. Voices drifted out, children arguing over card games, grandchildren demanding one more story before bed, family being loud and present and wonderfully alive. Josie stepped through the door into noise and warmth and the beautiful mess of a life well lived. Behind her, the frontier stretched vast and dark. But here, in this house, on this land, she was safe. The line JC had drawn 23 years ago still held, and she stood firmly on the protected side of it, not because she was weak, because she had earned the right to be loved fiercely. The frontier had tried to break her. She had refused. And in that refusal, she had built something unbreakable. A family that would carry her legacy forward for generations. A community that knew her name with respect instead of pity. A love story that began with blood and rope and rain, and ended with laughter and grandchildren and a porch where she could watch the sunset with the man who had chosen her when she believed she deserved nothing. She had started as invisible. She had become unforgettable. She had started believing she was nobody. She had become everything. The woman the frontier could not break. The woman who transformed pain into power. The woman who crawled through mud and darkness and chose to keep living. That woman closed the door behind her now, shutting out the darkness, shutting out the cold, walking into warmth and light and the family she had built with her own hands. Some women cannot be broken. They can only be transformed. And transformation, Josie had learned, was the most powerful form of victory. Not revenge built on violence, not triumph built on destroying enemies, just a quiet, stubborn insistence on surviving, on living well, on proving that the worst thing that ever happened to you does not get to write the ending of your story. You do. Josie Swanson Gentry had written hers, and it ended exactly the way she wanted, with love, with family, with a roof over her head and people who knew her name and a legacy that would outlast the mountains themselves. She had won, not with fists or guns or the violence that marked so much of frontier life, with something quieter, something stronger, the simple, stubborn choice to keep going, to keep building, to keep believing she deserved better, until better became her reality. The sun set behind the distant hills. The stars came out one by one. And inside the Gentry house, surrounded by everyone she loved, Josie finally understood something she had spent her whole life trying to learn. She had always mattered. She had just needed to survive long enough to believe it.